Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Marion Dobbins, and I am an ethnographer for George Mason Folk Life Department. And we are here at the Prince William County District Office of Congressman Gerald Connolly. We are videotaping Mr. Smith for Congressman Connolly's Northern Virginia Civil Rights Archive. This archive is a collection of testimonials from persons who were involved or affected by the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The collection of testimonials will be stored in the Library of Congress, the George Mason Folk Life Department, Prince William County Library, and Fairfax County Library. Mr. Smith, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and be a part of this project. So on behalf of Congressman Connolly and his office, I want to thank you for being a part of this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. This is going to be my pleasure.
So you ready to get started?
I am ready.
All right. Well, let's start first by you giving us your full name, your date of birth, and where you were born.
Ralph Jackson Smith, born June 23rd, 1944, in Prince Edward County, Virginia.
So you were born in Prince Edward County, Virginia, during Jim Crow segregation. Let's talk a little bit about growing up in Prince Edward County. What was that? What was the community like?
Well, the fact that I was born at home starts the story because the hospital was very segregated. Prince Edward County probably epitomized the height or the extent of racism and separatism in the state of Virginia, perhaps even in the South. That it was, as a youth, I obviously came through very segregated schools. Anyone familiar with the South, particularly Virginia, which is my database source, knew that the schools for I'll use terms interchangeably, but we were colored then. So the schools for the colored children often were on the campus or near the grounds of the local church. And you will find in history that a lot of the schools were named after the churches. So my elementary school was Mercy Seat Elementary, and our church was Mercy Seat Baptist Church. Typically, and my school was typical. There was a 4-room building, wood building, with potbelly stoves and no plumbing. I recall, because I lived so close to the school, interestingly, after the 2nd grade, one of our chores as the men, if you will, of the school, or the boys of the school, was to basically clean the school and go out in the fields and secure the wood and the kindling to provide heat. So the county did send teachers and so forth, but we had no lunchroom, we had nothing. And like I said, we would, every Friday, they would send the girls out to play, and the boys would clear the room out and mop and oil the floors, and then we'd go out in the afternoon and get the wood for the following week. So my intro to the world of education and just to the world in general started from a perspective you could observe. I mean, we would drive past and we would see this beautiful brick building, which served as the elementary school for the white children, with indoor heating, indoor plumbing, and new school buses. So we were too young to really make the connection, but we saw that it was different. And so we were always growing up feeling different, if you will. Looking back, I don't know that I was smart enough at 6 and 8 to recognize that, but I do recall feeling different when I got outside of my circle.
So in the community, did you have like a downtown center where you had merchants and entertainment?
Right.
Were those segregated? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was, Prince Edward County is an interesting story in and of itself. There were 5 counties, basically 4 counties surrounded it, and the center of Prince Edward was Farmville. It was a town of Farmville, Virginia, and all the surrounding counties fed into there. It had tobacco factories and so forth, and the merchants. There weren't shopping centers around everywhere. Farmville had a downtown, and so the citizens from the surrounding counties and obviously the local citizens would come to Farmville. And in those days, the shopping day basically was Saturday, and during the week also. And there was the colored side of town, if you will, Many of the merchants, well, all of the merchants you could go in, and many of them you felt like you could shop any way you wanted to. There were some stores where you just didn't go in. You weren't allowed to try clothes on, hats on, and things like that. The dynamic of it, though, as I recall, is if you as a stranger drove into Farmville during even the height of when the massive resistance, when the schools were closed and all of that, driving through, you would think, oh, what a nice peaceful town. People got along, if you will, but we knew our place, if you will, and they knew that all places were theirs. Restaurants, clearly, we just knew not to even try at that time. Earlier on, growing up, there was the Black Barber Shop and the Black Grill or restaurant, if you will, on our end of the town. And true to the stereotypes, it was across the track or down near the railroad track in the south end of town. You often see depictions of that era where we were at the south side, and that was true in Farmville.
Mm-hmm. What occupation did your father have, and what did your mother do during this time?
Well, there were certain periods. Now, my mother was homemaker for most of the time. My father, for the majority of his career, worked at a college near Farmville in Prince Edward County. It was an all-male school, Hampton Sidney College. He had various janitorial and other positions. He worked probably 2 or 3 jobs within the confines of the campus. At one point early on, he worked for the president of the college, chauffeured and did some amount of cooking. It was not the chef, but he did some cooking. The college had a college store, if you will, a fountain with drinks and various items that they sold to the students. He worked behind the counter of that. And then he did some janitorial work at one of the fraternities. Mm-hmm. Eventually, now, as an adult looking back, I realized what was going on. I remember having a conversation with him in my late teens when he was offered the position. Eventually, he ended up on the staff, on the professional staff at Hampton Sidney, working in the chemistry lab. Now, the underbelly of that story is they wanted some federal money, so they had to integrate their staff. And he was he was well respected in the community. He was kind of the go-to person if there were issues. The black community felt comfortable coming to him, asking if he would intercede on their behalf for certain things. So it fit. But he closed his career for, I don't know, 10 to 15 years working in the chemistry lab at the college. My mother did not work. She did some off and on domestic work. The situation, the impact of Prince Edward's decision regarding his school forced her to work. We will talk probably about that a little bit later, but as it affected her, at the time it happened, my older brother was in college, and they had, to the extent that it was planned, 3 boys, and they were 4 years apart. The idea at the time was when one is coming out of college, the next would be going in. So they were not prepared to have me in private school. And as we'll talk probably a little bit later, mm-hmm. That forced her to take a job, because while there were many organizations and many people offering assistance for this unexpected expense, nevertheless, they wanted to do their part. So she took on domestic jobs to offset the costs that was brought about by the integration issue.
Do you ever remember your parents sitting down and having a dialogue with you about segregation and your place within your community, or did you hear any of that from the pulpit of your church? Or
from the church, I listened with a child's ears, and I can say yes now because I can relate to what the pastor was saying and versus what was going on with hindsight. But with my parents, yes. My father was very supportive as time went on about what I was doing in the community, and I got my drive, if you will, from him. the caution came from my mother, and it always did, but it was reinforced that one summer when Emmett Till was brutally murdered. And I remember her very specific. Every time I went out, we used to have to go down to the college to get our mail at the central post office. We didn't have post office road boxes. And every day that she sent me to get the mail, she would say to me, either do not look at white women, don't speak to them, or if you have to, talk very clearly. And the thought behind that guidance was, at the time they thought that Emmett Till had made a pass at this woman. I think it was all lies, as it turned out. But the thought was he whistled at her or had a list, if you will. And so she was very, very concerned that in my nature of speaking to people, it might get mistaken by someone. Like I said, she didn't start with the Emmett Till situation, but it drove home to me then what she was always saying when I go out is to, boy, stay in your place, or don't do certain things. So yeah, we had those conversations leading up to what eventually exploded as the Prince Edward situation.
So is it fair to say there was some sense of fear and intimidation within the African American community there?
Oh, there always was, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. It probably came across as respect or cowardliness or so forth, but really it was our ancestors, our grandparents, and our parents knowing what could happen. We didn't have the overt Klan or the overt